Hello everyone, welcome to this presentation on running and knee pain. So a lot of people ask me in clinic whether running is bad for your knees, or a lot of people actually say to me in clinic that they've been running for the last 30 years and all that running on the roads made them damage their knees and it's all wear and tear, and if they hadn't ran for so much their knees would be painful. So this presentation is based to explain whether running is bad for your knees, and the short answer is no, it isn't. Running is actually good for your knees. If you like the long answer, then you can carry on watching. So what we're going to be discussing in this presentation is basically defining arthritis, because that is the main cause of knee pain in the older generation who have been active throughout their life. I'm going to discuss the research studies that back up my claim that running is actually good for your knees, particularly for arthritis. And then I'm going to be going through some training tips on how to train and run with arthritis and how to stop it from aggravating your knees. And then I'm also going to be going through running shoes and just explain what shoes are good and what shoes may not be so good for your knees. Cool. So to start off with, what is arthritis? So essentially, arthro means joint and itis means inflammation. So the word means joint inflammation, but it's a little bit more complex than that. So there's hundreds of different types of arthritis, but there's a few main sort of groups, and I'm just going to go through them quickly. The main one is osteoarthritis, and that is the one that I'm going to be talking about today. That is the most common form of arthritis in your knee and what people complain with. The next one is inflammatory arthritis. So the most common form of this is rheumatoid arthritis, and this is an autoimmune disease where essentially your immune system causes inflammation in your knees and causes a little bit of damage, or in any joint really. It's not always the knees, it's normally your hands or feet, and basically damages the joint, and you'd feel kind of like hot swelling joints that are really sore in the morning, and you may feel kind of unwell as well, just in general, in different periods of the year. You can then get infectious arthritis. So this is essentially where a bacteria or a virus gets within the joint and then causes inflammation, so increased synovial fluid. So your joint gets inflamed and it becomes painful. And then you can also get what's called gout, which is essentially where your body produces too much uric acid from foods that are high in purines, I think it is. So foods that are common or sort of got a high content of purine is alcohol, fish and meat. And what happens is the uric acid basically increases the fluid in the joint, and it's really common to get gout in your big toe. But the main one I'm going to be talking about is osteoarthritis, as that is the main one that runners will be complaining about within their knees. And here's a little stat from NICE. It's approximately 8.5 million people in the UK suffer from osteoarthritis. So that's like a massive percentage of the population actually have this condition. Okay, so what actually is osteoarthritis? So a lot of people say that it's wear and tear, but it isn't wear and tear. There's no wearing or tearing. You don't go for a run and it wears down your knees and then it starts hurting. That's not how it works. So it's osteoarthritis is a degenerative condition. So it relates to your age. So it's a bit like being young, you have colourful hair, and then you get old and then your hair goes grey. Or when you're young, your skin's nice and smooth, and then as you age, you get wrinkles. So you get wrinkles because the collagen becomes weaker and it has less elastin in it. So it becomes less taut, so it becomes wrinkly. So it's similar kind of process in your knees, but rather than being in the skin, it's in your cartilage. Cool. Well, I've got some research that essentially backs up my claim of why running helps arthritis and doesn't make it worse, or just knee pain in general. So this study is a systematic review and a meta-analysis over 15 other studies. So basically, it analyzes 15 studies as a group and puts them all together. And it's essentially looking at whether there's an association between running and arthritis, or osteoarthritis in the knee specifically. So we'll look at a group of non-runners and then a group of runners and see if there's any difference. So out of the 15 studies, basically the majority of them found that there was no difference in diagnosis rates in OA between runners and non-runners. So non-runners have the same amount of OA as runners for arthritis. There's only one study that should rub that thing up. There's only one study that found that there was an association. But, that's going against 15 other studies. There was no significant differences in radiological markers. So, if you scan a knee with like an X-ray or MRI, the knees weren't any different between runners or non-runners. There was one study, again, that same study, that did find a difference. There's always going to be conflicting evidence. There was no difference in pain in the knee, and there wasn't actually any conflicting evidence there. Pretty much the majority of them didn't find any difference. And then the main finding that is really important in this study, which actually supports running, is the fact that around 50% of runners didn't have to have surgery to deal with their OA compared to non-runners. Sorry. So if you're a runner, you'll have a 50% reduced chance of having to have surgery than a non-runner. So this shows that running can actually be preventative to osteoarthritis symptoms and sort of prolonging the progression of the condition. So you should probably be using arthritis as an excuse to start running rather than an excuse to stop running. Okay, so here's another study. It is also a systematic review and a meta-analysis, but they looked at 17 studies with a total of over 114,000 participants, and they essentially looked at the differences in prevalence of osteoarthritis in a control group, so that was non-runners, in recreational runners, so people that run for enjoyment or just for a hobby, and then in competitive runners. So it should be said that competitive runners were your highest level, so they were people that have represented their country internationally and run professionally, so they're going to be doing hundreds of miles a week or 100 miles a week. And essentially what this study found is the normal population, they have about 10% chance of getting arthritis in the knee. Whereas if you're a competitive runner, that goes up to 13%. So that suggests that running could increase your risk of getting arthritis by 3%. However, when you look at the recreational runners, so the people that are running a little bit less, they only have a 3.5% chance of getting osteoarthritis. Therefore, this decreases your chance by about 7%. So that shows that running can actually be protective of developing arthritis if you do it in the right amounts. So it follows a bit of a bell-shaped curve. So the more you run, the higher your risk goes up. So that's going higher. And then the less you run, the higher risk goes up. Then if you run a moderate amount, so in this part here, your risk is lower. So you want to be in that position where you're running to protect yourself from arthritis rather than to increase your risk. So I've thrown some studies at you to prove that arthritis is the risk of arthritis is lowered with running. Now I'm going to describe, if you have arthritis, what is the best way to train? Because obviously if you have arthritis in your knees, it's going to be painful. And if it's painful to walk or painful to go up and down the stairs, you're not going to want to go for a run because it's just going to be just as sore. So the key is to get yourself into the correct training zone. So by that I mean there's 3 different zones of training load. So the first zone is the lowest, and it's basically you can run, but it's not painful, but you're not going to get any adaptation in your body that's going to make you stronger, so you're not going to improve. The second zone is the sweet spot, so that's where you want to be. So that's where it isn't painful and it isn't exacerbating your knee, but you're still getting training benefit. So it's still going to improve your strength and you'll be able to progress your training. And then the final zone is where you go over the threshold that your knee can handle. So if you run too much and then it becomes really painful and sore, then you have to take a few days off. So you don't want to go into that zone because you're just going to take one step forward and two steps back kind of thing. So say you're running and then you're just going for like 1 minute a day, you're not going to be going into that threshold that your body adapts. And then say if you go up to 5 minutes running a day, your body is not painful, but it's your knee's starting to get stronger. So that's where you want to be, in that zone there. But then one day you decide to go for a 30-minute run, and then the next day it's really, really sore and really painful for hours after. That's when you hit zone 3, and then you can't run for another few days after that because it's too painful. So that's what you don't want to do. But how do you know when you're in this correct zone? Well, I'll explain that on the next slide. So you have to go off your symptoms. So if your pain levels increase by a normal amount, so if you're running and it's more painful than normal during your run, or if it's painful for over an hour after a run, then that's when you know you've done too much. You've probably gone into that high zone where you've aggravated it. So when you're running or doing your training, you want to make sure that it can be painful after, but only for like 5-10 minutes, and then it settles down quite well, and you can get along with your normal life without any pain or any issues, or no pain out of the ordinary. So if going up and down the stairs could already be painful, but it's not going to make it too much worse. Obviously no swelling, because then that would show that there's been a physiological response to the running, and it's obviously not ideal. And obviously no limping is a bit of a given. So what is the best way to train to achieve this and stay in the zone? So you basically want to slowly progress your training. So the best way to do this is first start with your volume. So by this I mean you want to increase the length that you're running. So say the first day you go running, you run for a minute, or you could do on and off. So you could do like 30 seconds run, 30 seconds walk, 30 seconds run, 30 seconds walk, and then maybe to progress it the following week you could do like a 45-second run, a 30-second walk, and then a minute run, 30-second walk. And then you can also increase the amount of time. So say you could be doing that for 5 minutes, maybe the following day you could do it for 6 minutes and then 7 minutes. And then once you get to that point where you find your level, your threshold, and you start to go over into that pain, that's when you know you've done too much. So you drop back down and just keep at that level, because you don't want to go into the painful threshold, into that zone 3. Once you can get a decent amount of volume, say you can run for 30 minutes straight, then you might want to start looking at the speed. So I don't know, maybe when you first start to go running, you're doing like 10-minute miling pace, and maybe next time go down to 9-30-minute miling pace, and then just slowly increase the speed until you get yourself to a good speed that you're comfortable with. And then the final thing to look at to progress is the hills, because the hills increase the load on the knee quite a lot, so especially when you're going downhill. Obviously your knee's going to have to stop yourself from falling over basically, and that's going to be working eccentrically, putting a lot of load on the knee. So that'll be the last thing I'd introduce into your running. So you could probably start doing that by introducing a slope, just a gradual light hill, and then maybe do one of those, and then the next time you could do 2 or 3 of them. And once they become comfortable, you can do steeper hills and introduce more steeper hills. So yeah, just play around with the routes that you have available to you in your house or around your house. Okay, yeah, and I find that a lot of people they handle training better when they're doing a high number of shorter runs rather than a lower number of longer runs. So if you're doing say 3 big runs a week and you're going into that threshold, you're going to have like days off. Whereas if you're just going 4 or 5 runs at a lower threshold or lower distance, you're not going to be going to that threshold, so you'll be able to run without taking rest days, and it'll be better for your knee because you're not going to be aggravating all the time. So when you first start training, do more frequent runs but for less time. Another thing that has been looked at in the research is increasing step rate. So increasing step rate actually reduces the load in your knees, which sounds a bit counterintuitive because you might think that if you're taking more steps on your run, that means your knees are impacting more times, which increases the load on it. But actually what happens is when you decrease your step rate, you have to shorten your stride length to be able to handle the speed. So what that means is your foot's going to land more underneath you, so you can kind of drive off it a little bit easier. Whereas if your foot's landing in front of you with a longer stride length, your heel's going to be hitting the ground, which is then going to put force up your leg into your knee, because you're basically braking every time you take a step, which then increases the load on your knee. The next one is running on softer grounds. That's obvious. Start running on grass and pavement. The next thing is something that has shown to help, but I'm not sure if it's the best thing to do. But essentially, it's change your running pattern to forefoot running. So rather than running onto your heels, you try and land onto your toes or onto your balls of your feet. But it's really hard to change your running pattern. So this might actually induce injuries elsewhere. So if you do this, you might end up aggravating your feet or your ankles. But essentially what happens is when you run on your toes or your foot, your ankle's taking more force, which then reduces the force up in your knee. If you're doing all these things, then you won't have to change your style of running. But you can always play around it if you want to. Another thing that's really important that I might do a presentation on later is strength training. And when I say strength training, I don't mean kind of the TheraBands that are stretchy. You have to go into the gym and get on a leg press machine and leg press like 40, 50, 60, 70 kilograms, whatever you can handle, and put a lot of weight through that knee. So that will help with the bone density and also help with your muscle strength. And the researchers, they say you need to kind of do this 2 or 3 times a week to get the physiological benefits. But yeah, so strength training is really important for every athlete, but especially when you've got osteoarthritis in your knees, as it just helps to build the strength in the muscles and in your bones. So try to include that if you have time. And the last thing is cross training. So say if you've gone out for your long run and it's just got a bit too painful, when you're on your rest day, rather than doing nothing, go out for a swim. You'll still be using your knee, you'll still be moving it, so that will help disperse the swelling or just help with the pain relief. And it's still activity, it's still going to keep you fit. Yeah, even if it's a bit boring, it's like swimming, it's still going to be beneficial to you. You can do cycling, you can just do another gym workout, do some yoga, Pilates. There's loads of things you can do that help supplement your running. Cool. So the final kind of point I think I want to make is on running shoes. So this is like a massive topic and it's quite complicated within the research with lots of biomechanical measurements and all that crap going on. But essentially, if I summarize it really quickly, you kind of get 2 different shoes. You can get the shoes with a big stack height. So a stack height is basically the cushioning. So if they have a big amount of cushioning on there, that's called the stack height, and that's increased. Whereas you can get these more minimalist shoes which have a decreased stack height, so less cushioning on the bottom. And essentially what most people would think is this one here would be better for your knees because it's more cushioning. But actually what happens is it makes you run at more onto your heel, so your angle of your ankle will be decreased, so your toes would be more pointed up, so you'd be landing more onto your heel strike, which is then going to be the force will then be bypassing the ankle and going straight up into the knee, so it puts more force onto your knees. Whereas if you run in these minimalist shoes, you're going to be landing more onto your forefoot here, or your midfoot, forefoot, which then puts more force on the ankle joint, as it has to deal with the movement of the ankle, which then reduces the force on the knee. So if you're looking for shoes to decrease knee pain, you actually need to get lighter, thinner soled shoes than thicker ones. However, the amount it might actually save you might be quite minimal, because if you kind of just run for a reduced amount of time, that's probably more beneficial than changing your shoe to a specific shoe. And it also costs less. If you just get the training loads right, you won't have to change your shoes. And the actual best thing to do, you can't see it because my face is covering it, but the best thing to do is to actually have different pairs of shoes. So if you get this pair of shoe, that will offload your ankle, which will make sure your ankles don't get injured. And then you have this pair of shoe, it will offload your knee, so your knees don't get injured. So if you have both of them, then that's the best way to go forward, really. So I think there was actually a study somewhere, I can't remember who it was, that's why I haven't put it in here, but they found that 3.6 pairs of running shoes decreases your risk of injury. So this is your excuse to go and buy 2 more pairs of shoes. So that's the best thing. Yeah, cool. All right, so just to summarize, osteoarthritis is degenerative. It is not wear and tear. It's something that pretty much everyone will get, and you just have to modify your training to handle the pain and symptoms. Running can be protective, so it can decrease your chances of OA, or if it comes to that, at least it'll delay the progression of it, so it will come later in your life, and it'll be able to increase your ability to handle the symptoms of OA. Elites are more at risk. So if you are running like 100 miles a week for the last 50 years, then you probably are going to develop OA more likely than someone that just sits on the sofa all day. Train for your symptoms. So if you have got arthritis in your knees, just listen to your body, and if it is swollen or if it is painful after you're running for a long time, then you've done too much. So next time, don't run that far, and make sure you take kind of days off when it is painful, so your body can recover. And make sure you do the strength work. So really load that knee up to get it nice and strong, muscular wise and also bone density wise. And then the final one was wear different types of shoes. So if you have different pairs of shoes, the load will be distributed in different areas of your body, reducing your risk of injury. And there we have it. Cool. So yeah, final message is keep on running and don't stress about knee injuries later in your life. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. And if you have any questions, you can contact me on there. And this is also my website up there. Cool. Thank you very much.